I was driving through the quiet streets of Millfield, Ohio, checking my watch for the third time, when my phone rang. The contractor's voice was different today. Shaky, urgent. "Booth, I need you to get over here right now." He said, his words tumbling together. "But don't come alone. Bring your parents and your sister with you. I've discovered something behind the basement wall, and you all need to see this together." The way his voice trembled made my stomach drop. As I pulled into my late grandparents' driveway, I saw his pale face peering through the front window. My parents arrived within 20 minutes of my frantic phone calls. Dad's truck pulled up behind my car, just as Claire's sedan turned the corner. Frank stepped out first, adjusting his baseball cap, and looking annoyed at being pulled away from his Saturday afternoon football game. Martha emerged from the passenger side, smoothing down her floral blouse and glancing nervously at the Victorian house that had belonged to her in-laws for over 40 years. "What's this about, Booth?" Claire called out, her heels clicking against the cracked driveway. At 28, my sister had always been the practical one in our family, working as a senior teller at First National Bank downtown. She pulled her cardigan tighter against the October chill. "You sounded frantic on the phone." "I honestly don't know," I admitted, leading them up the front porch steps. The house still smelled like Grandma's lavender sachets, mixed with the mustiness that had settled in during the years since their deaths. "Tommy just said he found something and insisted we all see it together." Tommy Rodriguez met us at the front door, his work boots caked with drying concrete dust. He'd been renovating houses in Millfield for 15 years, and I'd never seen him look this rattled. His usual confident demeanor had evaporated, replaced by something approaching bewilderment. "Thank you all for coming," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "I need to show you what I found when I was working on the basement moisture issue. But I want you to know I only looked because the wall was buckling from water damage." We followed him down the narrow basement stairs, their familiar creak unchanged since my childhood. The basement had always been Grandpa Harold's domain. His workshop occupied one corner with hand tools arranged precisely on pegboard walls. The opposite corner held Martha's canning supplies, mason jars lined up like soldiers on metal shelving. Tommy led us to the far wall where chunks of drywall lay scattered across the concrete floor. Behind the removed section, a doorway opened into what should have been solid earth. I was checking for water infiltration when I noticed this wall sounded hollow. Tommy explained, shining his flashlight into the space. "Turns out it was false. There's a whole room back here." The hidden chamber was roughly 8 feet by 10 feet, with concrete walls and a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. Metal filing cabinets lined 3 walls, their olive green paint chipped with age. Stacks of manila folders covered a folding table in the center, and cardboard boxes filled every available floor space. Grandpa always was organized, Dad said, his voice echoing in the small space. "Remember how he kept every receipt, every warranty, every piece of paper that came into this house?" I stepped closer to examine the filing cabinets. Each drawer was labeled in Grandpa's careful handwriting: property records, insurance documents, investment files, medical records. The labels were written in different inks, suggesting they'd been created over many years. Claire moved toward the table, lifting the corner of a manila folder. "These look recent," she said, her voice oddly tight. "Some of these documents are dated from last year." Martha had remained near the doorway, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. "Maybe we should just pack everything up and sort through it at home," she suggested. "This place gives me the creeps." But I was already opening the first filing cabinet, driven by a curiosity I couldn't explain. The top drawer contained bank statements going back 30 years, meticulously organized by date and institution. Grandpa had been thorough in his record-keeping, documenting every transaction, every investment, every financial decision. "Look at this," I said, pulling out a thick folder. He kept copies of everything: stock certificates, bond purchases, certificate of deposit renewals. No wonder he always seemed to have money when we needed it. The second drawer revealed property documents, deeds, tax records, homeowners' insurance policies. I found the original deed to this house purchased in 1953 for $3,800. Subsequent folders showed the gradual improvements Grandpa had made over the decades: the addition of central air conditioning, the modernized kitchen, the new roof installed just 5 years ago. "This is incredible," I murmured, opening the third drawer. He documented everything. But as I rifled through the investment records, something caught my attention. The most recent statements showed significantly lower balances than I remembered Grandpa mentioning. His stock portfolio, which had been worth over $200,000 according to documents from 3 years ago, showed a current value of less than $50,000. "That's strange," I said, pulling out more recent statements. "It looks like he sold off most of his investments in the last few years." Claire moved closer, peering over my shoulder. "Maybe he needed the money for medical expenses," she said quickly. "You know how expensive healthcare can be for elderly people." I continued searching through the files, growing more puzzled with each discovery. Bank statements from Grandpa's savings account showed regular large withdrawals over the past 5 years. $10,000 here, $15,000 there, always in round numbers that suggested intentional transfers rather than random expenses. "Wait a minute," I said, my heart beginning to race. "These aren't withdrawals for medical bills. They're transfers. Look at these routing numbers." I spread several bank statements across the folding table, comparing the transfer destinations. The routing numbers were familiar, matching accounts at First National Bank downtown. My throat tightened as I realized what I was seeing. "These transfers," I said slowly, "they're going to accounts belonging to you, Dad, and you, Claire." The basement fell silent, except for the hum of the furnace kicking on upstairs. Dad cleared his throat, his face flushing red above his flannel shirt collar. "Well, your grandfather asked us to help him manage his finances," he said defensively. "He was getting confused in his later years, making mistakes with his checkbook. We were just trying to help." Confused, I stared at him in disbelief. Grandpa was sharp as a tack, right up until he died. He balanced his checkbook to the penny every month. He could recite stock prices from memory. Martha stepped forward, wringing her hands. "Booth, you don't understand how difficult it was. Harold would forget he'd already paid bills, or he'd write checks twice for the same amount. We were trying to protect him from making financial mistakes." I pulled out more documents, my hands shaking with growing anger. Insurance policies had been changed, with beneficiaries altered from my name to my parents' names. Property deeds showed ownership transfers I'd never heard about. Most shocking of all, I found copies of legal documents that appeared to bear my signature, documents authorizing financial transfers that I had never signed. "This is my signature," I said, holding up a bank authorization form. "But I never signed this. I've never even seen this document before." The silence in the basement became oppressive. Tommy had retreated to the far corner, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding before him. Claire's face had gone pale, while Dad's jaw was set in the stubborn expression I remembered from childhood arguments. "You're overreacting," Claire said sharply. "Grandpa and Grandma trusted us to help them. They knew their memory wasn't what it used to be. They asked us to handle their finances because they didn't want to burden you with their problems." "Burden me?" My voice cracked with disbelief. "They were my grandparents. I visited them every week. I would have gladly helped them with anything they needed. Why would they give you power of attorney without even telling me?" I continued searching through the documents, each discovery feeling like a betrayal. Bank statements showed systematic emptying of savings accounts. Stock sales had liquidated investments Grandpa had held for decades. Even more disturbing, I found receipts for the sale of Grandpa's vintage car collection, 5 classic automobiles he'd restored with meticulous care, sold to a dealer in Cincinnati for a fraction of their value. "You sold his cars?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Those cars were his pride and joy. He was planning to leave them to me." "We needed to liquidate assets to pay for their care," Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Those cars were just sitting in the garage collecting dust." The final blow came when I discovered a folder marked legal documents in Grandpa's handwriting. Inside, I found copies of will modifications dated just 2 weeks before my grandparents' deaths. The documents showed they had attempted to change their will back to its original terms, restoring my inheritance and revoking the financial powers they had apparently granted to my parents and sister. But these weren't the final versions. They were drafts, marked copy, in red ink. According to the attached notes in Grandpa's handwriting, the original documents were to be filed with the family attorney, but there was no indication this had ever happened. Where are the originals of these documents? I demanded, holding up the copies. Grandpa tried to change his will back, but the lawyer never received the final papers. What happened to them? Claire snatched the documents from my hands, her face flushed with anger. You're being ridiculous, Booth. Maybe Grandpa was having second thoughts, but he never followed through. These are just drafts. They don't mean anything. They mean everything, I said, my voice rising. They prove that Grandpa realized what was happening and tried to stop it. They prove that he wanted to protect my inheritance. What did you do with the original documents? Without warning, Claire grabbed a handful of papers from the table and moved toward the basement stairs. This is insane, she said. I'm not going to stand here and listen to these accusations. We're family. We were trying to help. Claire, stop, I called after her. Those documents are evidence. You can't destroy them. But she was already halfway up the stairs, clutching the papers against her chest. The rest of us stood frozen in the hidden chamber, surrounded by the evidence of systematic financial manipulation that had drained my grandparents' life savings and stolen my inheritance. The truth hung in the air like dust motes in Tommy's flashlight beam. My own family had betrayed the people who loved them most. We gathered around my parents' dining room table 2 hours later. The stolen documents spread between us, like accusations waiting to be spoken. Claire had reluctantly agreed to bring back the papers she'd tried to take, but her defiant posture made it clear she considered herself the victim in this situation. The oak table, where we'd shared countless holiday meals and birthday celebrations, now felt like a courtroom. Martha busied herself making coffee, her nervous energy filling the kitchen as she clattered cups and saucers with unusual force. Dad sat rigidly in his chair, arms crossed, staring at the documents as if they might disappear through sheer willpower. I want explanations, I said, laying out the bank statements in chronological order. These transfers total over $400,000. That's more than half of everything Grandpa and Grandma had saved over their entire lives. We've already told you. Claire snapped, her usual composure cracking. They asked us to help manage their money. Elderly people often need assistance with financial matters. It's completely normal. Normal. I picked up a transfer authorization dated 6 months before their deaths. This moved $30,000 from their savings account to an account in your name, Claire. $30,000. What did they need that much help with? Martha returned from the kitchen, setting down a tray of coffee cups with shaking hands. Her face was pale, and she avoided making eye contact with anyone. Martha, you were there when these decisions were made. I pressed. Tell me exactly what Grandpa and Grandma said about these transfers. She began, then stopped, looking desperately at her husband. They were worried about their memory. Harold said he sometimes forgot whether he'd paid bills or not. He asked Frank to help him set up automatic transfers for their regular expenses. Regular expenses of $30,000 at a time. I couldn't keep the skepticism out of my voice. Martha, you knew my grandparents for 40 years. Did they ever spend that kind of money on anything except the house? I pulled out another set of documents, these showing the liquidation of Grandpa's stock portfolio. Look at this. Blue chip stocks he'd held for 20 years, sold at market lows. Whoever authorized these sales cost them tens of thousands in unnecessary losses. These stocks have recovered since then. If they'd needed money, any financial advisor would have recommended selling the bonds first, or taking dividends. Dad finally spoke, his voice defensive and loud. You don't know what you're talking about, Booth. You think you're so smart with your college education and your fancy job, but you weren't here dealing with their day-to-day problems. You visited once a week for Sunday dinner and thought you knew everything about their situation. I was here every Sunday for 10 years. I shot back. I took them to doctor appointments. I helped Grandpa with yard work. I sat with Grandma when she had pneumonia last winter. In all that time, I never once heard them express confusion about their finances. Grandpa could quote the balance of every account from memory. Claire leaned forward, her voice taking on the persuasive tone she used with difficult bank customers. People hide their problems, Booth. Especially proud people like Grandpa. He wouldn't have wanted you to see him struggling with simple tasks. We were protecting his dignity by helping quietly. Protecting his dignity by forging my signature. I held up the bank authorization form. This document gives you access to his safety deposit box, and it's signed in my name. I never signed this, Claire. This is forgery. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Dad's face turned red, and he stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. That's enough, he said, pointing a finger at me. I won't sit here and be accused of forgery by my own son. Your grandfather trusted us because we were family. We never took a penny that wasn't offered freely. Then explain the car collection. I said, my voice steady, despite my racing heart. Grandpa spent 15 years restoring those cars. He talked about them constantly. He was planning to leave them to me in his will. But according to these receipts, you sold them to a dealer in Cincinnati for $40,000. Those cars were worth at least $100,000 to collectors. Martha began crying quietly, dabbing her eyes with a napkin. We needed money for their medical care, she whispered. The assisted living facility required a deposit, and their health insurance didn't cover everything. What assisted living facility? I demanded. They never mentioned anything about moving to assisted living. They loved this house. Grandpa told me just a month before he died that he planned to stay here until they carried him out. The room fell silent except for Martha's sniffling. I could see the weight of secrets pressing down on my family truth, struggling to surface, despite their efforts to bury it. I opened my laptop and pulled up the website for the law firm that had handled my grandparents' estate. I'm calling Benjamin Walsh tomorrow morning, I announced. He was their attorney for 20 years. If they really wanted to change their financial arrangements, he would have handled the paperwork. Don't you dare, Claire said, her voice sharp with panic. This is family business. We don't need outsiders involved. Outsiders? I stared at her in disbelief. Ben Walsh drew up their original will. He handled the estate after they died. He's not an outsider. He's the person who can tell me what really happened to those legal documents Grandpa prepared. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Walsh's number. In fact, I'm calling him right now. Dad lunged across the table trying to grab my phone. Don't do this, Booth. You'll tear this family apart over money. I pulled back, keeping the phone out of his reach. I'm not the one who tore this family apart, Dad. That happened when you decided my grandparents' life savings was more important than their trust. The call went to voicemail, but I left a message anyway, speaking clearly while my family listened. Mr. Walsh, this is Booth Henderson Harold and Rose Henderson's grandson. I need to speak with you about some legal documents my grandfather prepared shortly before his death. I'll be in your office Monday morning at 9, unless I hear otherwise. When I hung up, the silence in the dining room was deafening. Claire's face had gone white, while Dad's hands were clenched into fists at his sides. You have no idea what you've started, Claire said, her voice trembling with barely controlled fury. Some secrets are better left buried, Booth. Some truths do more harm than good. The only truth that matters is this, I said, gathering up the documents and putting them in my briefcase. My grandparents trusted you, and you betrayed that trust. You stole their money, forged legal documents, and lied to everyone about what really happened. Martha looked up from her coffee cup, her eyes red with tears. What if you're wrong? She asked quietly. What if we really were trying to help, and you destroy your own family over a misunderstanding? I studied her face, searching for any sign of genuine confusion or innocent mistake. Instead, I saw the same guilt I'd been ignoring for months, the way she changed the subject whenever I asked about the estate settlement, the nervous glances she exchanged with Frank whenever I mentioned visiting the old house. "Then, you have nothing to worry about," I said, standing up and heading for the door. "If everything was legitimate, the attorney will confirm that. If not—" "If not what?" Dad challenged, following me into the hallway. "What are you going to do? Call the police on your own family? Have your own parents arrested?" I turned back to face them, my hand on the doorknob. "If you stole from my grandparents, if you forged documents, if you betrayed two people who loved you unconditionally, then yes, I'll do whatever it takes to get justice for them." As I walked to my car, I heard Claire's voice through the open door, sharp and angry. "He doesn't understand what he's dealing with. This isn't over." Her words followed me home like a warning, though I was too angry to realize just how right she was. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood, as I sat in Benjamin Walsh's law office waiting room. The walls were lined with legal textbooks and framed diplomas, the familiar smell of old leather and paper reminding me of Grandpa's study. Walsh had been practicing estate law in Millfield for 35 years, and his reputation for honesty was unquestioned. "Booth, come in," he said, emerging from his office with a concerned expression. "I have to admit, your message surprised me. Your grandfather's estate was settled months ago, without any complications. What legal documents are you referring to?" I followed him into the oak-paneled office and spread the photocopies across his desk. These were hidden in a secret room in my grandparents' basement. They appear to be will modifications dated 2 weeks before their deaths, but they were never filed with your office. Walsh adjusted his reading glasses and examined the documents carefully. His expression grew increasingly troubled as he read through the pages. "This is Harold's handwriting," he said slowly, "and these are legitimate legal forms. But you're right, I never received the originals. According to my records, the last time I spoke with your grandfather was 6 months before his death, when he called to update the property tax information on his will." 6 months. I frowned. "But according to his notes, he was trying to schedule a meeting with you just days before he died." Walsh opened a leather-bound appointment book and flipped through the pages. "Let me check my calendar from that time period." After a moment, he looked up with a puzzled expression. "You're absolutely right. Harold called my office on a Tuesday, saying he needed to schedule an urgent meeting about family matters. My secretary scheduled him for that Friday afternoon, but he never showed up. When I called to check on him, your father told me Harold had been hospitalized with a sudden illness." My stomach dropped. "What kind of sudden illness?" "Frank said it was food poisoning, possibly from a family dinner the night before. Harold and Rose were both admitted to the hospital, and they died within 48 hours. Walsh removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. "I attended the funeral, of course, but I never questioned the circumstances. At their age, sudden illness isn't uncommon." I pulled out my phone and called the hospital, asking to speak with someone in medical records. After being transferred twice, I reached a clerk who was willing to look up my grandparents' files. "Yes, Mr. Henderson, I have records for Harold and Rose Henderson from last October," the clerk said. "They were both admitted to the emergency room on Wednesday evening, with symptoms of severe gastroenteritis. The attending physician noted that their symptoms were consistent with food poisoning or possible medication reaction." "Medication reaction?" I asked, my heart racing. "What kind of medication?" "I'm not able to provide detailed medical information over the phone, but I can tell you that both patients had elevated levels of sedative medications in their blood work. The attending physician noted this was unusual, as neither patient had prescriptions for those particular drugs." I thanked the clerk and hung up, my hands shaking as I turned back to Walsh. They had sedatives in their system that they weren't prescribed. Someone gave them drugs that made them sick. Walsh's face had gone pale. Booth, these are serious accusations. Are you suggesting your grandparents were deliberately poisoned? Before I could answer, my phone rang. The number looked familiar. My sister's bank. This is Booth Henderson, I answered. Mr. Henderson, this is Janet Carroll from First National Bank. I'm the branch manager, and I need to speak with you about some unusual activity we've discovered in several accounts connected to your family. What kind of activity? I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Can you come to the bank this afternoon? And I'd suggest bringing an attorney. The seriousness in her voice made my blood run cold. Is this about my grandparents' accounts? Among others. Mr. Henderson, I think you should know that we've been contacted by federal banking regulators about potential fraud involving elderly customers. Your family's accounts are part of that investigation. I scheduled the meeting and hung up, turning to Walsh with growing dread. The bank wants to meet about fraud investigations. This is bigger than I thought. Walsh gathered up the documents and put them in a file folder. I'll need to examine these more carefully and compare them with the original will we have on file. But Booth, if your suspicions are correct, this isn't just about inheritance disputes. We're talking about elder abuse fraud, and possibly worse. I left the law office with more questions than answers, but one thing was becoming clear. My family's betrayal went far deeper than stolen money. They had systematically manipulated two elderly people, isolated them from help, and possibly contributed to their deaths to cover their crimes. The bank meeting that afternoon confirmed my worst fears. Janet Carroll, a serious woman in her 50s, led me into a conference room where a federal banking investigator was waiting. Mr. Henderson, the investigator said, introducing himself as Agent Morrison. We've been tracking a pattern of financial elder abuse involving bank employees who have access to customer information. Your sister Claire's transactions have raised several red flags. He spread out computer printouts showing account activity over the past 3 years. These transfers from elderly customers' accounts to accounts controlled by their relatives follow a specific pattern. Small amounts, at first, then increasingly larger sums as the victims become more dependent on their supposed caregivers. How many customers are we talking about? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. At least 12 families in this county alone, Morrison replied. The total stolen amount is over $2 million. In every case, the victims died within 18 months of the financial manipulation beginning, and their deaths were attributed to natural causes. The room seemed to spin around me. You're saying my sister is part of a conspiracy to murder elderly people for their money? We're saying the pattern suggests systematic financial exploitation followed by suspicious deaths, Morrison corrected. We're still gathering evidence to determine the full scope of the operation. Janet Carroll opened another file folder. Your sister had access to customer account information through her position at the bank. She could identify elderly customers with substantial savings and limited family oversight. The medication angle appears to involve her former boyfriend, who works at Millfield Pharmacy. Tyler Brennan. I said the name coming back to me. Claire dated him for 2 years. He broke up with her last spring. Mr. Brennan was arrested last week in Kentucky for theft of controlled substances, Morrison explained. When questioned, he admitted to providing sedative medications to several individuals in Ohio, including your sister. The medications were used to cause confusion and memory problems in elderly patients, making them more susceptible to financial manipulation. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. My grandparents hadn't been confused or suffering from dementia, they had been drugged into compliance. The family dinners where financial documents were signed, the sudden illness that prevented Grandpa from meeting with his attorney, the rapid decline in their final weeks, it was all planned. What happens now? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. We'll need you to provide any evidence you found, Morrison said. The documents from the hidden room could be crucial to building our case. But I have to warn you, your family will likely become aware of the investigation soon, and people who commit these crimes often become desperate when they're cornered. As if summoned by his words, my phone buzzed with a text message from Claire. We need to talk. Meet me at the house tonight. Come alone. I showed the message to Morrison, who frowned. Don't go alone, he advised. In fact, I'd recommend you don't go at all. We can arrange police protection if you feel threatened. But I knew I had to face my family one more time to look them in the eye and demand the truth about what they'd done to my grandparents. I just didn't realize how far they were willing to go to protect their secrets. That night, as I sat in my apartment reviewing the evidence, I heard glass breaking in the parking lot below. When I looked out the window, I saw all 4 of my car tires had been slashed, and someone had spray-painted "Mind Your Own Business" across my windshield. My phone rang immediately after an unfamiliar number with a local area code. "You're making a mistake, Booth," a voice said, electronically disguised, but recognizably threatening. "Some secrets are worth protecting. Drop this investigation before you regret it." The call ended before I could respond, leaving me alone with the realization that my family wasn't just guilty of theft. They were willing to intimidate and threaten to keep their crimes hidden. I called the police to report the vandalism and the threatening call, but I knew this was just the beginning. My family had too much to lose to give up without a fight. Tuesday morning brought a knock on my apartment door that changed everything. Through the peephole, I saw 2 police officers holding official-looking papers. My stomach clenched as I opened the door, though I tried to keep my expression neutral. "Booth Henderson," the older officer asked, consulting his clipboard. "That's me." "We have a warrant to search these premises in connection with threats made against Frank and Martha Henderson and Claire Henderson Mason. You'll need to step outside while we conduct the search." I stared at the warrant in disbelief. According to the document, my family had filed formal complaints, alleging I had threatened them with violence, sent harassing text messages, and exhibited signs of mental instability that posed a danger to their safety. "This is ridiculous," I protested. "I never threatened anyone. They're the ones who vandalized my car last night." The younger officer looked skeptical. "Sir, we need to follow proper procedure. If you have evidence of vandalism, you can file a separate report. Right now, we're here about these specific allegations." For 2 hours, they searched my apartment looking for evidence of threats that didn't exist. They found nothing incriminating, because there was nothing to find, but the damage was done. My neighbors watched through their windows as police carried out boxes of my personal belongings, creating exactly the kind of spectacle my family had intended. After the officers left, I called Agent Morrison to report what had happened. His voice was grim when he answered. "They're trying to discredit you before you can testify," he said. "This is a common tactic when financial criminals feel cornered. By making you appear unstable or vindictive, they hope to undermine your credibility with any future jury." "But there's no evidence of threats, because I never made any threats," I said, pacing my apartment. "Evidence isn't the point at this stage," Morrison explained. "The point is to create doubt about your motivations and mental state. I'm guessing they're just getting started." He was right. Over the next week, my life became a nightmare of false accusations and manufactured evidence. My supervisor at the engineering firm where I worked received an anonymous call claiming I had been making threats against coworkers and behaving erratically. My former girlfriend Jessica got a visit from Claire, who tearfully explained that I was having a psychological breakdown and might be dangerous. The most damaging attack came when Dr. Richard Hawkins, my family's longtime physician, filed a professional opinion with the County Mental Health Board, questioning my psychological stability. According to his report based on conversations with concerned family members, I was exhibiting signs of paranoid delusion, persecution complex, and possible violent tendencies. "This is insane," I told Agent Morrison when I received a copy of the report. "Dr. Hawkins has barely spoken to me in 10 years. The last time I saw him was for a routine physical 3 years ago." "Let me guess," Morrison said dryly. "Dr. Hawkins plays poker with your father." "How did you know that?" "Because in financial elder abuse cases, the perpetrators always have a network of enablers, people who owe them favors, share their secrets, or benefit from their crimes in smaller ways. Your family has been planning this defense strategy for months. The psychological evaluation was devastating to my reputation in the small town. Millfield had fewer than 8,000 residents, and gossip traveled faster than news. Within days, people I'd known my entire life were crossing the street to avoid me. The manager at the grocery store followed me around the store as if I might steal something. Even my barber, who'd cut my hair since I was 12, suggested I might be more comfortable finding a new place for haircuts. The final blow came when I discovered my family had hired an attorney and filed a petition with the county probate court to have me declared mentally incompetent. The legal documents, signed by Dr. Hawkins and supported by statements from Frank, Martha, and Claire, painted a picture of a young man who had become obsessed with his grandparents' deaths and was now fabricating elaborate conspiracy theories to explain his disappointment with his inheritance. "They're trying to have me committed?" I told Benjamin Walsh, who had agreed to represent me, despite the accusations against my credibility. "If they succeed, I'll lose any legal standing to challenge the estate or pursue criminal charges." Walsh examined the commitment petition with obvious disgust. "This is a coordinated attack designed to silence you permanently. If you're declared incompetent, they can seize control of any assets you have, including your grandparents' house, and any remaining inheritance. They can also have you institutionalized indefinitely." Can they really do that? Unfortunately, the law provides broad powers to family members who claim someone is a danger to themselves or others. The burden of proof is relatively low, especially when they have medical opinions supporting their claims. Walsh paused, studying the documents. "But there's something fishy about the timeline here. Look at the dates." He spread the papers across his desk, pointing to the signature dates on various forms. Dr. Hawkins's evaluation is dated last Monday, but the legal petition was filed the previous Friday. They had the court documents prepared before they even had the medical opinion. "That proves they planned this in advance," I said, feeling a spark of hope. "It suggests premeditation, yes. But more importantly, it gives us grounds to challenge the petition on procedural violations. They violated due process by filing before completing their evidence gathering. That small victory felt huge in the face of everything I'd lost. My job was on hold pending resolution of personal issues. My friends avoided me. My own family had turned the entire community against me with their lies and manufactured evidence. But Agent Morrison had some good news when he called that evening. "We arrested Tyler Brennan in Kentucky this morning," he said. "Under questioning, he's been very cooperative about the medication scheme. He's provided evidence that your sister ordered specific sedative drugs that were used to incapacitate elderly victims." Will his testimony be enough to charge Claire? It's a start, but we need more evidence to build a solid case. The problem is that your family knows we're investigating now, and they're destroying evidence as fast as they can. That night, I sat in my apartment, reviewing everything that had happened, trying to understand how my own family had orchestrated such a comprehensive attack on my credibility and freedom. The commitment hearing was scheduled for the following Friday, and if they succeeded, I would lose everything: my freedom, my finances, and any chance of getting justice for my grandparents. But as I reviewed the documents Walsh had given me, I noticed something my family had overlooked in their rush to silence me. They had been so focused on discrediting me that they had made a crucial mistake, one that would ultimately unravel their entire conspiracy. The truth was finally within reach, but I was running out of time to expose it, before they could have me locked away forever. Wednesday morning found me in the offices of Harrison Investigations, a private detective agency 3 towns over from Millfield. I'd driven the back roads to avoid being seen paranoid about my family's surveillance after discovering they'd been tracking my movements through my cell phone. Dale Harrison was a former FBI agent who specialized in financial crimes, and Agent Morrison had recommended him off the record. His office walls were covered with commendations and photos from successful cases, but what impressed me most was his reputation for taking on cases the local police couldn't or wouldn't pursue. Your family has been busy, Harrison said, reviewing the files I'd brought. This is one of the most sophisticated character assassination campaigns I've seen outside of organized crime cases. Can you help me fight it? Maybe. But first we need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. He opened a laptop and pulled up several databases. Your sister's position at the bank gives her access to financial information on hundreds of elderly customers. If this is bigger than your grandparents' case, there could be multiple victims and multiple crimes. Over the next 4 hours, Harrison walked me through the evidence systematically. He showed me how to trace financial transactions, how to identify patterns of fraud, and most importantly, how to document everything properly so it would stand up in court. The key is building a timeline that shows premeditation, he explained. Financial elder abuse rarely happens overnight. It's usually a gradual process that escalates over months or years. We started with public records cross-referencing death certificates with banking activity in the months before each death. The pattern that emerged was chilling. Over the past 3 years, 12 elderly customers of First National Bank had died within 18 months of large financial transfers to accounts controlled by their relatives. In every case, Claire had processed the transfers personally. This isn't just fraud, I realized staring at the computer screen. It's serial murder disguised as elder care. That's a strong accusation, Harrison warned. But the pattern does suggest systematic exploitation. The question is whether we can prove intent to harm, or if these were just opportunistic thefts that led to neglect. The breakthrough came when Harrison accessed pharmacy records through a contact in the state licensing board. Tyler Brennan's prescription history showed he had been ordering sedative medications in quantities far exceeding any legitimate medical need for over 2 years. Look at this, Harrison said, pointing to the screen. He ordered enough Ativan and Ambien to sedate a nursing home, but the prescriptions were written for different patients using stolen prescription pads from 3 different doctors' offices. How many doctors' offices? Dr. Richard Hawkins' family practice, Dr. Sarah Mitchell at the Internal Medicine Clinic, and Dr. James Foster at the Geriatric Specialist Office. All 3 doctors treat primarily elderly patients, and all 3 have had prescription pads reported stolen in the past year. The conspiracy was bigger than I'd imagined, involving not just my family, but medical professionals who were either complicit or dangerously negligent about securing controlled substances. We need to find someone who witnessed the medication being administered to your grandparents, Harrison said. Without a witness, this is all circumstantial evidence. That's when I remembered Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, my grandparents' next-door neighbor for 30 years. She'd always been curious about neighborhood activities, and her kitchen window faced directly into my grandparents' backyard. We drove to her house that afternoon, and I was relieved to find her home and willing to talk. Mrs. Patterson was 82 years old, but sharp as ever with the kind of detailed memory that comes from years of observing her surroundings carefully. Your grandparents were wonderful neighbors, she said, serving us tea in her front parlor. I was so sad when they passed. They seemed fine one day, and then suddenly they were in the hospital. Mrs. Patterson, did you notice anything unusual in the weeks before they died? I asked. Any visitors? Any changes in their routine? She paused, setting down her teacup with a thoughtful expression. Well, now that you mention it, your sister Claire had been visiting quite frequently. Usually in the evenings after work. She'd bring food sometimes, saying she was checking on them. Did you see what kind of food? Casseroles, I think. And she always seemed to stay for dinner. But what struck me as odd was that your grandparents often seemed tired and confused after her visits. Harold would forget to bring in his newspaper the next morning, or Rose would leave her garden hose running all night. Harrison leaned forward. Did you ever see Claire giving them anything to drink, or any medication? Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened, as if she'd just remembered something important. Actually, yes. One evening in late September, I was watering my roses, and I could see into their dining room window. Claire was at the table with them, and she gave them both pills to take with their dinner. I thought it was their regular medication, but when I asked Rose about it the next week, she seemed confused about what pills I was talking about. Would you be willing to testify about what you saw? I asked, hardly daring to hope. Of course, dear. If it helps find out what really happened to Harold and Rose, I'll tell anyone who'll listen. But Mrs. Patterson had an even bigger surprise for us. I should probably mention that I have security cameras now, she said casually. My grandson installed them last year after we had some break-ins in the neighborhood. The camera by my back door has a clear view of your grandparents' kitchen window. Harrison and I exchanged glances. How long do the cameras keep recordings? Harrison asked. 6 months, I think, though I haven't looked at them since they were installed. It took 2 hours to download and review the footage, but what we found was devastating evidence of my family's crimes. The cameras had captured multiple visits from Claire, Frank, and Martha during my grandparents' final weeks, including the crucial evening when they arrived carrying pharmacy bags and stayed for over 3 hours. This is it, Harrison said, pausing the video on a frame showing Claire handing pills to my grandfather. This proves they were administering medication without medical supervision. Combined with the pharmacy records and the financial documents, this gives us everything we need to expose the conspiracy. But as we prepared to leave Mrs. Patterson's house, I noticed a black sedan parked across the street, with 2 men inside watching us. When I pointed it out to Harrison, his expression grew serious. Your family knows we're getting close, he said. They're probably going to escalate their efforts to stop you before the commitment hearing. As if summoned by his words, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Call off your investigation, or face the consequences. You have 24 hours. That night, Mrs. Patterson called me in tears. Booth, someone broke into my house and took my computer. They destroyed the security system too. I'm so sorry all that evidence is gone. But what my family didn't know was that Harrison had already copied all the crucial footage to his secure servers. Their desperate attempt to destroy evidence had only confirmed their guilt and given us proof of obstruction of justice. The endgame was approaching, and for the first time since discovering the hidden room, I felt like I had a chance to win. Thursday morning brought news that changed everything. Agent Morrison called at 7 a.m., with barely contained excitement in his voice. Tyler Brennan agreed to cooperate fully with federal prosecutors, he said. He's providing detailed testimony about the medication scheme in exchange for reduced charges. But that's not the best part. He kept records of every transaction, including photos of the pills he provided, and text messages with your sister discussing dosages. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. What kind of records? Everything. Brennan was apparently paranoid about getting caught, so he documented every aspect of the operation. He has photos of the pill bottles, screenshots of bank transfers from Claire, even recordings of phone calls where they discussed which victims would be targeted next. How many victims are we talking about? 14 confirmed cases, possibly more. The total theft amount is approaching $3 million across 5 counties. This is going to be one of the largest elder abuse prosecutions in Ohio history. Within an hour, I was at the federal building downtown, reviewing evidence with Morrison and the prosecutor assigned to the case. The documentation was overwhelming, a paper trail that connected Claire to systematic theft from elderly bank customers coordinated with Tyler's medication scheme to incapacitate the victims. The most damaging evidence is this, the prosecutor said, playing an audio recording on her laptop. Claire's voice was clearly audible, discussing my grandparents specifically. Harold's becoming suspicious about the missing money, Claire said on the recording. Tyler needs to increase the dosage, so he stays confused until we can get the final transfers completed. If he calls his attorney, we're finished. That was recorded 3 days before your grandparents' deaths, Morrison explained. It proves premeditation and shows they knew the medication was affecting your grandfather's cognitive abilities. But the prosecutor had more shocking news. We've also discovered that your family has been planning a defense strategy for months. They hired a criminal attorney in Columbus 6 weeks ago, long before you found the hidden room. They knew this day would come. She showed me a series of emails between Claire and the attorney, discussing strategies for discrediting potential witnesses and creating reasonable doubt about their client's innocence. Most disturbing were the emails about me, detailing plans to have me declared mentally incompetent if I ever became suspicious about the estate. "They've been planning to silence you since before your grandparents died," the prosecutor said. "The commitment hearing tomorrow is just the final step in a conspiracy they've been developing for over a year." That afternoon, I met with Benjamin Walsh to prepare for the commitment hearing. Thanks to Harrison's investigation and the federal evidence, we now had enough ammunition to not only defend against the competency petition, but to expose my family's crimes in open court. "The key is the timeline," Walsh explained. "We can prove they filed the commitment petition before completing their supposed evidence gathering, which violates due process. More importantly, we can show that their accusations against you are part of a broader pattern of criminal behavior." But as we prepared for court, Harrison called with disturbing news. "Your family is making their final move," he said. "I've been monitoring their activities, and they're planning something for tonight." Claire maxed out 3 credit cards this afternoon, buying airline tickets to countries without extradition treaties with the United States. "They're planning to run..." It looks that way. But here's the concerning part: they've also been asking questions about psychiatric hospitals that accept involuntary commitments. If they can get you declared incompetent tomorrow, they might try to have you institutionalized while they flee the country. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My family wasn't just trying to silence me, they were planning to destroy my life completely and then disappear with their stolen money. What can we do? The federal agents are ready to make arrests, but they need one more piece of evidence to ensure the charges stick. They want to catch your family in the act of destroying evidence or fleeing with stolen funds. That evening, I sat in my apartment surrounded by police protection, watching my phone for updates from the surveillance teams, monitoring my family's activities. At 11 p.m., the call I'd been dreading finally came. "They're moving," Harrison reported. "Frank and Martha are loading suitcases into their car, and Claire is carrying file boxes out of her house. It looks like they're planning to leave tonight before the hearing tomorrow." "What about the evidence they're carrying?" "That's what we're waiting for. If they try to destroy financial documents or dispose of the medication supplies, the federal agents will have grounds for immediate arrest." But my family was smarter than that. Instead of destroying evidence, they were planning something much more sinister, a final attempt to eliminate the only witness who could bring them to justice. At midnight, my phone rang with a call that made my blood run cold. "Booth, this is Claire. I know you're working with the federal agents, and I know what you think you've discovered. But you don't understand the full situation. Meet me at Grandpa's house in 1 hour, and I'll tell you the truth about what really happened. Come alone, or you'll never learn what Grandpa and Grandma really wanted." The line went dead before I could respond, leaving me with an impossible choice. I could stay safe under police protection and let my family escape with their crimes unexposed, or I could risk everything to face them one final time and demand the truth about my grandparents' deaths. The commitment hearing was 12 hours away, and this might be my last chance to get justice for the 2 people who had loved me most in the world. I made the decision that would change everything. I would meet Claire at my grandparents' house, but I wouldn't go alone. Agent Morrison and Harrison had been waiting for exactly this opportunity, a chance to catch my family in a final criminal act that would seal their fate forever. "They're desperate," Morrison explained as we coordinated the operation. "Desperate people make mistakes, and mistakes create evidence. We'll have agents positioned around the house recording everything. If they threaten you or try to coerce you into silence, we'll have grounds for additional charges." At 12:45 a.m., I pulled into the familiar driveway where this nightmare had begun. The Victorian house looked different in the darkness, its welcoming warmth replaced by an ominous shadow that seemed to swallow the moonlight. Claire's car was already there, along with Dad's truck and a rental car I didn't recognize. I approached the front door with a hidden microphone recording everything, and federal agents watching from concealed positions. My hands shook as I turned the doorknob, but my resolve was absolute. Tonight, I would finally learn the truth about my grandparents' deaths. The living room was lit by a single lamp, casting long shadows across the furniture that held so many childhood memories. Claire sat in Grandpa's favorite armchair, while Dad and Martha stood near the fireplace. A fourth person, a man I'd never seen before, sat on the couch with a briefcase beside him. "Thank you for coming," Claire said, her voice calmer than I'd expected. "I want you to meet Jonathan Pike, our attorney. He's here to help us resolve this situation before it destroys our entire family." Pike stood and extended his hand, which I ignored. "Mr. Henderson, your family has asked me to offer you a substantial settlement in exchange for dropping your investigation. They're prepared to pay you $500,000 to walk away from this dispute and sign a non-disclosure agreement." $500,000. I couldn't hide my disgust. "You think I can be bought off after what you've done?" Dad stepped forward, his face red with anger. "What we've done, Booth. You have no idea what your grandparents were really like in their final years. They weren't the sweet old people you remember from Sunday dinners." "What are you talking about?" Martha spoke for the first time, her voice shaking. "They were cruel, Booth. Manipulative and cruel. They threatened to disinherit all of us if we didn't follow their exact demands. They used their money to control everyone around them." I stared at her in disbelief. "That's a lie. Grandpa and Grandma were the most generous, loving people I ever knew." "To you," Claire said bitterly, "because you were their precious grandson. But they treated the rest of us like servants. Dad had to ask permission to borrow money for Mom's cancer treatment. They made me write monthly reports on how I was spending every dollar they loaned me for my mortgage down payment. The lies were flowing freely now, a desperate attempt to justify their crimes by rewriting history. But I had expected this, and I was ready with the truth." "Is that why you drugged them?" I asked quietly. "Because they were cruel. Is that why you gave them sedatives that confused them and made them helpless?" The room fell silent. Pike shifted uncomfortably while my family exchanged guilty glances. "We don't know what you're talking about," Claire said, but her voice lacked conviction. I pulled out my phone and played the audio recording Morrison had given me, Claire's own voice, discussing dosages and victim targeting with Tyler Brennan. The sound filled the room like an accusation, undeniable and damning. "That recording was obtained illegally," Pike said quickly. "It won't be admissible in court." "Actually, it will," I replied, "because Tyler Brennan made it himself and turned it over voluntarily, along with all the other evidence of your medication scheme." Dad lunged toward me, his face twisted with rage. "You sanctimonious little bastard. You think you're so righteous, but you have no idea what it's like to struggle for money while watching your parents hoard wealth they'll never spend. So you decided to kill them for it." "We didn't kill anyone," Martha protested. "We just helped them along. They were already dying, Booth. The medication just made them more comfortable in their final weeks." The confession hung in the air like smoke, recorded by my hidden microphone and witnessed by federal agents positioned outside. But Claire wasn't finished. "It doesn't matter what you think you know," she said, reaching into her purse. "Tomorrow morning, you'll be declared incompetent and committed to a psychiatric facility. Dr. Hawkins has already signed the final papers. You'll spend the rest of your life in an institution, and no one will ever believe a word you say." "The hearing is tomorrow," I said calmly, "but I won't be the one facing judgment." That's when the front door opened, and Agent Morrison entered with 3 other federal agents, their weapons drawn and badges visible. "Federal agents," Morrison announced. "Nobody move." The shock on my family's faces was almost comical. Pike immediately began protesting about illegal surveillance, but Morrison cut him off. "Claire Henderson Mason, you're under arrest for elder abuse, financial fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. Frank Henderson, Martha Henderson, you're under arrest for the same charges." As the agents read them their rights, Claire turned to me with pure hatred in her eyes. "You destroyed your own family for money," she spat. "How does that make you any different from us?" "Because I'm fighting for justice," I replied. "Not for money, but for two people who couldn't fight for themselves." The arrests were just the beginning. Over the next 6 months, the investigation uncovered the full scope of their crimes. 14 elderly victims had been systematically defrauded and medicated into compliance. The total stolen amount exceeded $3 million spread across multiple bank accounts and real estate investments. Tyler Brennan's cooperation led to additional arrests, including Dr. Hawkins, who had been prescribing unnecessary medications to elderly patients in exchange for kickbacks. The corrupt pharmacy scheme had been operating for over 3 years, targeting vulnerable seniors who trusted their caregivers and medical professionals. The trial lasted 8 weeks and made national news as one of the largest elder abuse cases in Ohio history. The evidence was overwhelming: financial records, medical testimony, recorded conversations, and the security camera footage that proved premeditation and coordination among the conspirators. Claire received 15 years in federal prison for elder abuse conspiracy to commit murder and financial fraud. Dad was sentenced to 12 years for his role in the scheme, while Martha received 8 years after agreeing to testify against her co-conspirators. Dr. Hawkins lost his medical license and received 5 years for his role in the medication conspiracy. The financial restitution process took another year, but ultimately, over $2.5 million was recovered and returned to victims' families. I inherited my grandparents' full estate, as they had originally intended, but the money felt less important than the justice we had achieved. I moved into my grandparents' house after the renovations were completed, converting the hidden basement room into a memorial study where I display photos and mementos from their lives. The house feels peaceful again, filled with the love they had built over decades of marriage and family. The foundation I established in their memory has helped over 100 families investigate potential elder abuse cases, providing legal support and financial assistance to those who can't afford private investigators or attorneys. Mrs. Patterson, now 83, serves on the foundation board and has become a close friend and surrogate grandmother. I found love again with Sarah Mitchell, a victim advocate who worked on our case and understood the importance of fighting for justice, even when it's painful and difficult. She helps me remember that not all families are built on manipulation and greed. Some are built on genuine love and mutual respect. The most meaningful moment came 6 months after the trial, when I visited my grandparents' graves to tell them that justice had been served. I brought roses from Grandma's garden that I've kept blooming in their honor, and spoke to them as if they were sitting beside me. "They can't hurt anyone else now," I told them. "And everyone knows the truth about how much you loved us, and how hard you worked to protect what you'd built together." The evening air was warm, filled with the sound of cicadas and the distant laughter of children playing in the nearby park. For the first time since finding that hidden room, I felt at peace. The investigation taught me that family should be built on love and respect, not control and manipulation. True strength comes from standing up for what's right, even when it's the hardest thing you'll ever do. The people worth having in your life will stand with you when you fight for justice, while those who betray your trust reveal their true character through their actions. My grandparents' legacy isn't the money they saved or the house they built. It's the love they showed and the values they taught about treating others with dignity and respect. That legacy will continue through the foundation and through every family we help escape from financial abuse and manipulation. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought against the people who should protect you. But victory feels sweeter when you know you've honored the memory of those who truly loved you. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? How do you think you'd handle discovering that the people you trusted most had betrayed that trust for money? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story helped you recognize warning signs of elder abuse or inspired you to protect the vulnerable people in your life, please like this video and share it with others who might benefit from hearing this message. Subscribe for more stories about courage, justice, and the strength it takes to stand up for what's right. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes, the greatest act of love is refusing to enable those who would harm the innocent.